our opening presentation for this. Here we go. We've got Nicky. Delighted to introduce you to our afternoon keynote, who is Nicky Perfect. And Nicky spent 3 decades in the Met Police, 10 years as an international hostage and crisis negotiator, working on the elite New Scotland Yard hostage and crisis negotiation unit. And Nicky's travelled all over the world teaching negotiation practices and working with the UK government on international operations. In 2022, the Queen's New Year's honours list, Nicky was awarded the British Empire Medal for meritorious service to the community during the pandemic. And that led to an invitation to the King's coronation in 2023. And Nicky, you did just see it there. I don't know if we can flash that back up, but I have a copy here. And Nicky is author of the best-selling book, Crisis: True Stories from My Life as a Hostage Negotiator. And we will be giving away 100 free copies of Nicky's fantastic book for participation in the Q&A throughout the day. So if you have scanned our QR code to contribute to the sessions throughout the day, then you are in a chance of winning one of these books. I suppose a bit on Nicky personally, lives with her partner, stepdaughter, 8 goats, 4 dogs and 2 pigs. And so in her own words, Nicky, you say life is never boring, certainly sounds it. So in today's session, the art of negotiating behavior change, insights from a hostage and crisis negotiator. Nicky's going to be drawing on the remarkable and truly unique experience she has to teach us life lessons from real life crisis negotiations, lessons that businesses can use to encourage real behavior change with their employees. And Nicky's going to divulge some fascinating insights into the human brain and how it affects our communication. And I suppose the underestimated power of listening as she breaks down exactly what it takes to influence people. So don't forget to scan that QR code. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions for Nicky in the Q&A to follow. But that just leaves me to hand over to you. Over to you, Nicky.
Thank you, Finlay. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today and for having my book as one of the prizes. That's a real honour and a privilege to be here. So, yes, the art of negotiating behaviour change, a hostage and crisis negotiator's perspective. That is me. I really am called Nicky Perfect. Could you, next slide, please? Before we even start to talk about behaviour change and how the skills of a hostage and crisis negotiator might help you today, I'd like to address the elephant in the room, which is, of course, my surname, which is Perfect. As my dad always said to my mum, he was born perfect and she only became it when she met and married him. Sadly, we lost my dad in 2022, but he was telling that joke right up until the end. Next slide, please. This is just a quick outline of what we're going to cover in the next 20 to 25 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit to you about me so you know more about my background and why I believe that communication and negotiation is key to successful influencing and persuading and leading that behaviour change. We're going to talk a little bit about you, and I include myself in this as a human being, around how the brain works and how we have different conversations depending on what emotional state we are in, which again is important when leading change and wanting to influence people, because there is a timing factor involved, especially if you're getting emotional pushback. And I'm going to introduce you to the FBI stairway, and we're going to talk about listening, which I believe is the key to all communication. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit about me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me because they've done MRI scans on the human brain. And we know that when you talk about yourself or talk about a subject that you're really passionate and interested in, there is part of your brain that lights up, and it's the same part that gives you that big dopamine hit. So please indulge me for a couple of minutes whilst I get my daily dopamine hit. So I am an international hostage and crisis negotiator turned trainer. I was in the Metropolitan Police in London for 31 years, joined at the age of 5, obviously, when they were recruiting in the 80s. And I had a variety and a varied career. And if I'm honest, before I became a negotiator, I thought I was a pretty good communicator. And I based that on the relationships I had inside and outside of work with both victims of crime and those people that I ended up arresting. Now, the negotiation course, for those of you that don't know anything about hostage and crisis negotiation in the UK, I'll just briefly tell you that to become a negotiator, you have to have quite a lot of experience. In London, you had to be at the rank of an inspector, and you also had to have certain qualities. They then put you on a very intensive 2-week course where they monitor you pretty much 24/7 to make sure you are suitable to become a negotiator. They test you in everything that you do and question everything that you say. So I went from this person who I was pretty confident in my communication. I turned up on the first day and I was ready for this course. I was already an advanced driver and I'd had qualifications and challenges around participating and passing firearms courses. And I was like, well, how difficult is this course really going to be? But that 2-week course really changed my life, because what they showed me was a different way to communicate, a way that you could build relationships very quickly in very intense circumstances, in life and death situations. And I had one of those epiphany moments on that course, and perhaps you can relate to this. But suddenly I realized what I was going to do, what my purpose in life was: to be a negotiator, to get onto the full-time unit, which just at the time consisted of 6 people, which I was successful in doing, and then also to be part of that training team. And I wanted to be part of the training team because they'd had such an impact on my life. I became the director of UK training in 2013, and that allowed me to do some amazing things like travel around the world, teaching hostage and crisis negotiation, learning about psychology and human behaviour, and also participating in operational crises that were happening through the world and in London. So 80% of my time, so 85% of my time was spent in London dealing with people who were making decisions whether to live or die on that particular day, working with families who had had people kidnapped. That in London at the time, there was about 1 a week, mainly gang on gang, and also then travelling internationally to work with and on behalf of Her Majesty's government, helping people that got caught up in terrorist crisis across the world. I retired in January 2018, had no idea what I was going to do, and I had a chance conversation with the owner of my local garage. I live in a small village in North Bedfordshire. Randomly, I ended up buying the garage, converted the car showroom into a coffee shop and a gym, and kept the garage workshop, so running 3 businesses. And as I was running the businesses, I was like, hang on a sec, I'm using all the skills that I had as a hostage and crisis negotiator with my customers and with my team, definitely with my partner, and definitely with my 17-year-old. So these skills are really transferable, those skills that I had the privilege of learning as a negotiator. Next slide, please. Now, you will be definitely aware of this phrase, communication is a soft skill. And I've put a great big red cross in it because I believe that communication is a life-changing and a life-saving skill. Next slide, please. And as we go through this presentation, hopefully you'll be able to see that. Next slide, please. In fact, can you jump to? And the next one. Perfect. Now, these are just some barriers to communication. This is a very elevated helicopter approach to give you all the information that I know in 20 to 25 minutes. But some of the barriers that we have are based on what we believe to be true in our values, and I'm going to look more deeply into beliefs. Also about our state and how we feel. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and you want to influence the way that they behave, or you want to change something about their life, how are you feeling? Are you in the right frame to be having that conversation? Are they in the right frame to be receiving that information? Because if they're very resistant and coming at it from a perspective from the emotional brain, it will be harder for you to influence them. One of my mentors once told me that adults are actually just children with better excuses. And we know that when children are either hungry or tired, they're hangry, and that makes them behave in an emotional way. As adults, we are just the same. When we are challenged around something, especially our opinion or a belief that we have that is incredibly strong, that can cause us to have an emotional reaction. The judgments that we make, and we do judge, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's there and designed to protect us. It comes from our primitive brain that we're making instant decisions of, can I trust this person? because trust is key in influence and persuasion. If you think about those people that have the biggest influence on your life, there will be an element of trust in there. The stronger the trust, the easier it is to help people to be influenced. And then finally, we like to be right. I definitely include myself in this. I love to be right. And I have two friends in my life, one of whom I go and phone up or see when I want to be right, and the other one when I want the truth. In my years as a police officer, I learned that there are three sides to every single story. Your side, my side, and actually what happened. Listening is key to that as well. Finding out the motivators from somebody, what is driving them, what is their belief system. Next slide, please. We're going to have a quick look at beliefs, because beliefs and values are a very large and broad subject. So we're just going to have a look at how beliefs drive the way that we think, and when they drive the way that we think and we respond when challenged, how that can stop us from influencing another person. Next slide, please. So this is what a belief is. This is a dictionary definition, an internal feeling that something is true, even though that belief may be unproven or irrational. And there are many beliefs that we have. I've been able to listen to some of the conversation today, the belief around electric cars. Do they really work? Are they a good thing to have? When you have a conversation with somebody who doesn't believe that to be true, you can feel that push against it and that resistance to that change. There's a reason why people don't talk about politics and religion, because they are very strong beliefs. When you look at Brexit, and I'm definitely not going to get into politics today, so don't worry. When you look at the Brexit vote, that was an incredibly emotional vote. And I know families now still who are not talking to each other because of different ways that they voted. So that's how beliefs influence our life. They change the way that we behave. If you look at those people who have very strong beliefs that they are willing to live or even willing to die because of their belief systems, people like Martin Luther King, people that come from terrorist organizations, people who have a very strong belief around what is right and what is wrong, Gandhi, all of those people that we see, they have very strong beliefs, and some of them are willing to give up their own lives for those beliefs. That's how powerful they are. This is what we're dealing with when you are meeting somebody who is resistant to the belief that you have. And that's important to remember, because when we look at the FBI change stairway and we look about influence and persuasion, we have to remember that different people see the world differently. Let me explain that in a bit more detail. I want you to imagine you have a pair of glasses. Every morning you put your glasses on, and in the lens of your glass, you have your beliefs, your values, and your experiences. Now, what makes your glasses unique to you are only you have had your own personal experiences. Yes, you might have the same beliefs as other people. Yes, you've probably got a set of values that are very similar to other people. But your uniqueness is driven by your experiences. Put all of that together and your glasses are yours alone. Now, everybody you meet today, tomorrow, all those people you've already met, those people you're going to meet, they all have their own set of glasses that they put on every day. And when we look at the world from a different perspective, a different belief system, it can be really interesting. It can really help us in that influence. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you about my first ever negotiation and how beliefs are so powerful. So I've completed my course. I can't wait to do my first ever negotiation, and I'm waiting a little while for my phone to ring. And then it's January one evening, and I can hear my work phone ringing, which is unusual because I'm not on call. So I find my phone, I pick it up, and there in the middle of the screen is the name Stuart. Now I'm excited because Stuart is somebody who taught me how to be a negotiator. But because I'm a professional and I've got 20 years service as a police officer before I became a negotiator, I know how to answer the phone in a calm and professional manner. Hi, Stuart. Hi. Hi, Stuart. Hi, Stuart. Hi, Nick, says Stuart. I know you're not on call, but there's an incident 10 minutes down the road from you. Can you go and deal with it? I said, yeah, of course I can. Tell me what's happened. And he tells me this. A young man has just been released from prison for grievous bodily harm. He's gone round to his ex-partner's address. They have a child together, a child he's never seen before, and they have an emotional conversation, an altercation. She alleges that he has assaulted her and he takes the child away without her permission. There's a car chase around London. He's surrounded by police officers. He's locked all of the doors, refusing to speak to anybody, and he's holding the child up like a shield. Can you go and negotiate the safe release of the child and also the safe release of him? I'm like, of course I can, Stuart. And as I'm waiting for a fast car to come and pick me up and take me to the scene, these are my belief systems. Heroin negotiator, me, obviously, arrives on scene, has a great conversation with the young man in the car. He listens to her, she listens to him. He opens the door, hands her the child, and is gently led away by other police officers. Now, of course, none of that happened. 8 hours I was there for. In that time, he said 2 things to me. Number 1, you don't understand. You do not understand. And number 2, I'm not going to repeat on a Thursday afternoon, but it was go away or something similar. Now, the child was safe and well, but the young man, he ended up being tasered and there was a big fight. And I left that negotiation feeling that I had failed, feeling that I had failed him, that I'd failed the negotiation team, that this huge thing that had impacted my life and that I wanted to do forever, perhaps it just wasn't going to work. And I watched other great negotiators. I listened to what they were saying. I learned more about human behavior and how the brain works. And suddenly I realized that that whole conversation had been about me. He didn't see a heroin negotiator walking towards him. I'm guessing, although I don't know this to be true, that he saw a white, middle-aged, middle-class woman and probably thought, how are you going to help me? You're going to take away something I've only just seen, the child that I love, that I've only just met, and you're going to send me back to a place I don't want to go. Because I'm guessing if I was him and I'd seen the world from his perspective, that is exactly what I would be thinking. And suddenly when I realized this, that you can listen and see the world from somebody else's perspective, it helped me open to my eyes and it helped me to start to listen to understand. Because when you can see the world from somebody else's glasses, from someone else's perspective, then you can look at what is motivating them, look at what their belief systems are, and how can you use that to then influence their behavior. Next slide, please. This is the actual scene. On the actual event. Next slide, please. You probably struggle to see this, but I am at the far right as you look at your screen. Next slide, please. And there I am because it was absolutely bucketing with rain as well. Next slide, please. So what happens when our beliefs and our values are actually challenged? Next slide. I want you to imagine the human brain is split into 2. I know it's not, but for simplicity today, we're just going to imagine that it is. And on one side of your brain is the emotional state, and on the other side of your brain is the logical state. There is a great book out there called The Chimp Paradox, which if you're interested in reading further about human brains and psychology, I would highly recommend. Next slide, please. Now, when our beliefs are challenged, or our opinions are really, let's call beliefs a really strong opinion, are challenged, what happens is our emotional side of the brain takes over, and it takes over to keep us safe. It's like, no, I feel under threat. There's something about this conversation I don't like. You are challenging what I believe to be true, so therefore you are challenging me. And from a helicopter perspective, 2 things will happen. One is you might become more aggressive. I don't mean necessarily physically aggressive, although that can happen, but you'll start to talk over people. So maybe you'll be in a meeting and you'll find that somebody starts to talk over you. That's when you know that something is going on, that there is a belief system that's been challenged. Maybe you'll talk about people, the person that you don't quite get on with, the person that doesn't quite communicate in the same way that you do, the person on your team or a member of your family that you really struggle to engage with. Or you'll use dismissive language like, that will never work. Why are we doing that again? We tried that 7 years ago. We're just going in a big cycle. So they'll use dismissive language, which might actually be personal to you as well, depending on how much they feel they are being attacked. Or they'll go the other way. So they'll become submissive. They'll avoid the issue, keep quiet in meetings or conversations, and won't participate. And we know when we withdraw from something, it stops us from feeling valued and validated. And if we want people to be on board, if we want to drive change, if we want to influence and persuade, that validation and that feeling valued is absolutely key. That's when you get less resistance. Of course, you're always going to get some resistance when somebody has a different opinion from you, But what we can then do is we can start to look at how we can work in collaboration, how I can see the world from your perspective. Here's my opinion. Next slide, please. So this is where we would like to be. Now, when I'm standing here at nearly 2:15 on a Thursday afternoon and everything is calm and logical, it's simple. But what happens is our emotional brain can take over really quickly. And we have conversations and we suddenly feel that we're resisting it. We suddenly feel that we're using unconscious words. And most of the conversations that we have are from an unconscious perspective. And what I mean by that is we don't necessarily think about it. If you think of all the conversations that you've had today, whether that's via email, WhatsApp, any other social media, on the phone, face to face, you've probably had hundreds of interactions. How many of those do you actually remember? How many of those were you actually present in? How many of them you had a conscious conversation? And when you're in that logical space and you're able to listen to others, you're also able to put across your own point of view, but you don't have to do that in an aggressive way. We can be assertive in a nice, calm, and kind way where we're understanding of the other person because we can see the world from their perspective. Next slide, please. This is the FBI behavior change stairway. And the idea of this is that you go from first impressions to collaboration in a step-by-step format. Now, of course, we are human beings, so we have a very strong emotional side, and we will often go up and down, up and down, up and down the stairway. But what I really want to show you today is that if you want to get to that step that says influence and persuade, you have to get to trust. The other person has to trust what you are saying. They have to believe it. They have to see the passion that you have in it. They have to be able to listen and see where you're coming from so you can show them what you believe to be true in a way that they can see it to be true. Because often we communicate and we believe the other person has received the information that we're sending, but we don't check. And then we find that the other person hasn't received the information in the way that we intended it to be. Now, down the side of this stairway, you can see ALS. That is active listening skills. And that's what we're going to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes talking about. And underlying it all is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is about recognizing how you feel and recognizing how the other person feels and recognizing the other things that are going on in the world. So let's focus on active listening today, because as I said right at the very beginning, listening to me is the most underrated skill. And I use the word skill deliberately because it is a skill. And like every other skill, it has to be practice. Now, I wish I'd known this when I was much younger. I learned it when I went on the negotiation course. It really changed the way that I started to have conversations with people. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Why is listening so important? We know from research, from experience, that it helps us to build trust. And we know when we have trust, that's when we can influence people. And we know when we can influence people, that's when we can collaborate. And that's when we get the behavior change. And people will remember us. You will know the people in your lives that have given you a really good listening to. One of my mentors, every time I had a conversation with her, I walked out the room and I was like, there's something different about her. There's something different. I don't know what it is, but I felt valued and validated. Listening is also a skill. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at the 4 modes of listening. But if you don't take anything else away from my presentation today, please remember this. People who feel listened to are more likely to listen to you. People who feel listened to are more likely to listen to you. And that is how powerful listening is. Next slide, please. So let's have the look at the 4 modes of listening. Next slide, please. Here they are: combative, competitive, passive, and active. And we'll go through each one individually. And as we do so, I just want you to start thinking about how you listen to people. There's also a caveat with this, that you will now know that hardly anybody really listens to you. So please don't go home and have a conversation with people that you love and care about and say, you're listening to me in a combative way. I know this. Next slide, please. And this is combative listening. It's an emotional brain listening. We are listening to be right. We are listening to be right. Sometimes we'll talk over the other person. We might be sarcastic, but we're definitely not in the logical space. Great examples of this is if you tune into Prime Minister's Question Time, or any time there is an interview going on between a politician and the interviewer, you will see combative listening at its best. Next slide, please. Competitive listening. Now, this is my favorite because I'm definitely guilty of this, and I see this all the time in everyday conversations. They look a little bit like this. Hey, how are you today? Oh, do you know what? I don't feel so great. I've got a terrible cold. Now, generally in life, there are two responses to this. Number one is, oh yeah, there's loads of that going around. And number two is, I had that last week. Not only did I have that last week, I gave it to the whole family. They were all off school and work sick. Oh yeah, I think actually that might be the cold that my Aunt Mabel got. Went onto her chest, pneumonia, hospital. So we listen for our turn into the conversation to add our story, and we're not really listening. We're just waiting for our turn to have our say. Next line, please. Passive listening. Another one which I am particularly good at. Passive listening is where we pretend to listen whilst we're doing two things at the same time, or we might even be just listening to our own internal dialogue. And it goes a little bit like this. Maybe you're sending an email, so you're engrossed in your computer, or sending a text message and you're engrossed in your phone. When somebody arrives by your side and it's clear that they want to talk to you. So this is what might happen. You go on, I'm listening, and carry on doing what you're doing. So now we know you're definitely not listening. And the other person starts talking, because what we do is when we have something to say, even if we know the other person isn't listening, we say it anyway. So we carry on typing and we do this. Oh, yeah. Okay. The other person leaves the conversation going, they definitely haven't listened to me. But it's okay, because I've given them the burden of responsibility of what I was saying. The person who wasn't really listening goes, I wonder what they wanted, because I missed half of what they said. And we could change that really simply by doing something like this. The person that comes to speak could say this. Oh, I can see you're really busy. Can I just have a couple of minutes of your time? When you're ready, I just want to run this by you. And it's important to tell them what you want to run by them. Or the person that's tapping and typing away could do this. This looks important to you. Value and validation. Give me a couple of minutes. I need to finish this email and then I'll be right with you. Simply done changes the whole conversation. Next slide, please. And then we have active listening, of course, which is where we're fully present with no judgment, focusing on the words, the tone, and what's not really being said. What's really going on? What's underneath that safe conversation that you're having with them? What's really driving them? What are they fearful of? What are their beliefs? What's their values? What's their experience? Because when we can find that out, then we know what motivates somebody. And that's when we can really collaborate and work with somebody and influence that behavior change. Next slide, please. This is me. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet because of my surname. So if you want to come and join me on LinkedIn, please do. If you want to follow me on any of my social media, I'd be very grateful to see you. And please ask me any questions. Hopefully I've left enough time, Finlay, for questions.
Oh, don't worry about that, Nikki. We've got loads and we're going to put those to you shortly. Thank you ever so much. That was fascinating. It was excellent to, I suppose, have a different perspective on something that we, certainly myself and a lot of the people attending this webinar today, kind of look at every day. Now, don't forget, everyone, that we have got a copy of Nicky's book here. I think you can just about see it. There we go, Crisis. And anyone who's engaging with our Slido, asking questions for Nicky, upvoting, is going to be in a chance for winning one of those. And I suppose, Nicky, I mean, of course, it was a great presentation. I mean, we could talk about that, I'm sure, for the rest of the session. We're going to have to move over to commuting specifically, I guess. And I'd be interested to learn. So I was actually reading through some of your book earlier. I want to read an excerpt for everyone else, which says, it's 1 a.m. I looked up and saw a pair of thin legs in skinny jeans dangling over the edge of the multi-story car park's top level. As I made my way quickly to the 5th story, I heard a woman's voice echoing down its bare concrete stairwell. "You just stay back, stay right back. If you don't, I'll jump." Now, of course, this really shows us that you're used to sort of dealing with situations where they're really very much at their lowest points. And I'm just curious how this can kind of translate, and a lot of what you were talking about with the FBI negotiation stairway to really, I guess, the more everyday and mundane topic of how you would choose to travel to work. So is there any way you can elaborate on that and to show us how this can kind of transition over from those kind of, I suppose, extreme situations to something more everyday?
Yeah, definitely. So 3 things I learned, 3 powerful lessons. One of them is that we all have a story. And depending on where you meet the person in their story will depend on the reaction you get. So if you are trying to influence people to cycle to work or get the bus or stop driving in whatever way that will be, you will be met with resistance, especially if there is an underlying issue. For example, it's really important I have my car because I have to get to hospital to see my mum straight after work, because I have to get home and pick the kids up from school. And actually, I'm a single parent. I'm balancing that with running my life, having a job, and now you're telling me that I need to spend more time getting to work. How on earth am I going to fit all of that in? So you get an emotional crisis response. The second one is that we all have a crisis at some stage in our life, depending on what that is. And it will depend on what loss you're going through in general. So somebody else might have the issue about traveling on public transport because they come home late from work at night. And there is a fear. I have a fear because I've been attacked before. I've been attacked when I got off the last bus in the street, and now I have a fear of buses. How are you going to protect me? So it's about looking at the belief system and looking at the world from a different perspective, rather than going, oh yeah, but it would be much better for you to do this. It might well be better for me to do this, but there's a whole other realm of my life that's going on in here. And that's what's important to me, because at the moment, I don't trust you. I don't even know you really. So if you can't see the world from my perspective, how can you possibly tell me what is the best thing for me to do?
Some really interesting points in there, and I think something that struck me from your presentation when you were showing the slide with the FBI behavior change stairway, and you stressed that you've got to get to trust. Maybe is there something lost in that conversation with the individual about why organizations want them to travel differently? Maybe is that point ever, perhaps that point's not being made, and is there a way that you think organizations could make that point where it would land with their employees, so they can kind of reach that level of trust and then engage in the conversations about actually how we go about influencing people to get on board with that messaging?
Yeah, I'll refer you to my favourite slide of the whole thing, which is people who feel listened to are more likely to feel listen to you. Because when we listen to people, we know that it validates you and values you. And we know that when people feel valued, they're more likely to do things. You only have to think about your own life. When you work in a place where you feel valued, and value comes from 2 places. One, that you feel that you're giving value, and one, that you feel that you're valued. And the easiest way to show somebody that you value them is to listen to their opinion, to ask them what their opinion is. What do you think? What would be the barriers for you personally? Oh gosh, somebody's listening to me. That's amazing. Thank you. And I can hear you. I hear you've got really strong emotions around that. And I'm just wondering why that is. Great. Okay. Yeah, I do have some strong emotions because actually I'm balancing time all of the time. And I want that to be recognized. It might not be time. It might be something else. It might be cost. It could be anything depending on the person. But honestly, once you recognize that how powerful listening to the other person is and getting their perspective and using words like us and we rather than you and I, that helps people to feel that they're collaborating, that they're part of something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that certainly rings true. I mean, we know for certain that it's the first part, if you like, of influencing behavior is that you've got to make it personal to the individual. And I suppose you can be communicating the cycle to work scheme to somebody who commutes 40 miles, they're not going to feel that that's very relevant to them. But I suppose when you peel back another layer, that person, even if they were to live closer, might think, well, perhaps I'm not fit enough to cycle 5 miles into work. And so I suppose that's where that more personalized conversation comes into play. But Nicky, we've got loads of questions. If you don't mind me being so bold, if we can make this quick fire, because we've got so many to get through. So we're using this upvote system with the ticks on the right. So in pole position at the moment is Amy Smith. And Amy wants to know, hi, Nicky, what's the difference between negotiation and influencing?
So negotiation is a conversation with a purpose, and influencing is where you get to influence. You could use the word manipulation, but nobody likes to use the word manipulation because it has a negative connotation, where we're getting somebody to change their behavior to have a different outcome.
Brilliant. We have Anonymous saying, thank you for sharing the FBI behavior change stairway. It's the first time I've heard of it. Is it science or data-led or more learned best practice?
Both. It was designed in America by the FBI in the 70s after Munich, the Olympics at Munich, and America were going to have the Olympics held in America, and they didn't want to have another Munich. So they were like, well, how can we do something differently? And they got a couple of officers involved, one who was a psychologist and a frontline officer, and another one who was very good at talking to people and listening to people. They did their own research, and just recently the collaboration, the top step, has been introduced. It was written by a guy called Gary Neusner. If you watch Waco, he was the negotiator at Waco, or you can, if you Google him, you'll find him. And so the short answer is both.
Both. Okay, so Jade Forster wants to know, what are your top 3 pieces of advice for negotiating in everyday life?
Jade, I'm going to be really boring here, but listen.
So we got another question here. How can we negotiate and change the behavior of powerful executives and government officials to advance the sustainability agenda might be applicable there. So yeah, Nicky, how do we negotiate and change the behavior of powerful executives and government officials to advance the sustainability agenda?
Yeah, so if you look at the wording of their powerful, so you've called the executives powerful, which is interesting. And I just highlight that because there's something in your belief system around them having more power than you. And I get that they are decision makers. So there will be a different power empowerment word there. I'd just like to highlight that. But the way that we can do that is to find out what their belief system is. So if I call it the 4 Ps, if you start to think about what's your purpose of your conversation, why are we having that conversation in the first place? And then what's our first impression? What are they going to think of us? How can we take them up the stairway so that they trust our opinion? And who are you going to do it with? Are you going to do it with the whole government? Or are you going to do it with an individual? Probably an individual would be more effective than trying to do to a whole group of people. So have a purpose of that first interaction, make a good first impression, understand what you really want from the conversation. I can spend all day doing this, obviously.
Right, so we've got another question from Casey Reed here. Does openness to behavior change vary by generation? Are different techniques required? I suppose we could broaden that by saying different subsets of society as well.
Yeah, definitely. So our values and beliefs are driven literally by the country we were born in, the region of the country, the street in the region, the house within the street, those people that immediately bring us up, how old we are, what we have learnt to be true from generational. So it's about, again, listening to what's important to that person. The only way we could, so when we say that different generations behave in a different way, it's not everybody within that generation, it's different people. So again, bringing it back to the listening and find out what's important to that individual is how we are able to do it. But there's a whole thing around culture as well.
Thank you. So Oliver Bennett is asking, what advice would you give to managers for handling difficult conversations with employees to inspire constructive behavior change?
So Oliver, I'll give you a simple 4P system. I won't go into detail, but it's this: Have a purpose for the conversation. So every time you have a conversation with that individual, have a purpose from it. Have a plan. So the what ifs. What if they say this? What if they do that? What if they come at me like this? What if they get emotional? What's my exit strategy? Look at the world from their perspective. Spend some time, if you know the individual, writing down what you believe is true for them. How do they see that perspective? And then practice. So before you go into the conversation, have a massive look at it. So if I just bring that back to my first ever negotiation now, knowing all the things that I do, I would approach the conversation like this. I'm guessing you're probably looking at me and seeing a white, middle-aged, middle-class woman and wondering what on earth we have in common. Perhaps you're even thinking that I'm going to take your child away from you and send you back to prison. And the reason I'm thinking that is because I'm trying to look at the world from your perspective, and if I was sat where you're sitting, that's how I would be feeling. That is so powerful. And if you open up a conversation with an employee where they can see you've done that, they will feel incredibly valued and validated.
Great stuff. Thank you, Nikki. Amelia Davis is asking, what are some strategies for effectively communicating expectations and boundaries without creating resistance in employees?
You will probably get resistance in some way, shape or form, because we're human beings and we believe that what we believe is right. And when you challenge that, it does create that resistance. So some strategies are really, if you feel that the conversation is becoming a bit emotional, that you're getting some pushback, is to really just go into that active listening mode and use reflective language. So you reflect back the emotion, you reflect back what they're saying to you, you summarize what they're saying to you. And gradually when we do that, we know when we echo the words of another person, because sometimes our lives are like this and we just see straight down our own tunnel. But when someone listens to us and reflects back, this kind of happens. And we're like, okay, hang on a sec. Yeah, I am thinking that. Yeah, I am feeling that. Why am I feeling that? And then we can help the other person understand what's going on for them. But then we can also understand what's going on for them. And that's when we can influence and persuade them.
Fantastic.